Okay, so for the last recording here, we're going to talk about operant conditioning. And operant conditioning was developed really by Skinner. And Skinner's basic idea is the environment, the nurture. It's not so much the nature and the biology, but the environment, the nurture, has everything to do with how you can train anyone to do anything. And so there are a couple of key variables he talked about, page 246 and so forth, kind of gets into it. Looks like these pages might be 249. We have two types of ways of doing things. There's something called continuous reinforcement and partial reinforcement. For continuous reinforcement, what we try to do is after every correct behavior, we try to give it reinforcement. So if I was teaching you in a face-to-face class right now, every time somebody said a correct answer, I would give you a dollar bill or some candy. So continuous reinforcement, acquisition is very quick with continuous reinforcement. Organisms learn to respond very quickly. The problem is, as soon as you lose the dollar bills or the candy, extinction is also very quick. So continuous reinforcement might be useful, but it's not used that often. Instead, we tend to use partial reinforcement schedules. Page 249 of your book goes over a few different examples of partial reinforcement. In one type, it's called a fixed ratio response. And in a fixed ratio, if somebody responds after each fourth question with a right response, you would give them a reward. So if you produce 4 things on the assembly line in a row, every 4 things you produce, you get a reward based on the number that you actually do. Some Mary Kay consultants, Avon people, it's based on how much sales you actually do. So it's based on a fixed ratio, how much you produce. The other type is called a fixed interval. And a fixed interval is based on time. That the idea is that with a fixed interval, that if somebody gives a correct response after every 5 minutes, I give them the dollar bill. So you base it on time, and if somebody gives a correct response after that right time, then they get a reward. So that's fixed interval and fixed ratios. They tend to be a little bit quicker for acquisition, but they also tend to be very subject to quick extinction as well. More to the point that people often do are variable schedules. Have you ever played the slot machines before in Atlantic City or Las Vegas or other places? Slot machines work on a variable ratio schedule. You never know when they're going to pay out, unless you're watching the Oceans movie, Ocean 11, 12, and 13. You never know when they're going to pay out, and they pay out in various ways, and so they tend to make acquisition a little bit slower, but once somebody gets a payout, they think, oh, it's going to be the next time I'm going to get this. You vary how often they're going to get rewarded. So in a variable ratio, you pull the lever a number of times. You might get one after one pull. That's actually the worst possible scenario because it could be 40 or 50 and hundreds of dollars lost before you get it again. So it's a variable ratio and a variable interval. If a teacher is teaching a class, he might reward somebody after 5 minutes on trial 1, 10 minutes on trial 2, 7 minutes on trial 3. So those are partial reinforcement schedules. With the partial reinforcements, especially the variable ones, acquisition is slow, but extinction tends to be very slow as well. So we have these schedules of acquisition and extinction. The other thing that we have to talk about is the idea of positive and negative reinforcement. Reinforcement, if you look on the bottom of 51, in reinforcement, we basically have things that increase behavior. So we try to do continuous or any sort of reinforcement to increase behavior. Negative reinforcement is the same idea, but many times with negative reinforcement, a good example, if you're married or you're living with somebody, you nag and annoy them to clean up the house or clean up the dishes. You're doing something negative to get them to increase their behavior. So positive and negative reinforcement are being done to increase behavior, which is very different than punishment. In punishment, you're trying to reduce a behavior. The abstract that you had talked about token economies, which is one way to get people to do things that are correct. You try to basically reward correct behaviors. You have a point system, and token economies are a way of doing that, if you want to summarize the abstract and related to that. For punishment and spanking, I'd ask you to read the abstract that is down there below and summarize in your own words related back to operant conditioning and the key terms used. The one thing that I will say for you in regards to punishment, unfortunately, it's done a lot of times out of anger. If you are going to deliver punishment, you've got to make sure that the punishment fits the crime, that the child knows when they're going to be punished and what the punishment will be. It needs to be delivered rather quickly, right after the bad event happens, and the child needs to know what they need to do to make sure that punishment does not occur again. Unfortunately, in a lot of situations, punishment is done randomly. It is done in ways that are just, the parents are getting angry and upset and frustrated. The child doesn't know what's coming, and it can lead to a lot of negative outcomes like depression, anxiety, and loneliness. So I'll ask you to summarize the healthy word about discipline abstract there. The final thing that I'll talk about here is the final type of learning, social modeling. Watch the YouTube video on social modeling and then go to page 261 of your book, and that will share with you how social learning by Bandura and social modeling is just a little bit different than these other types of learning we've talked about, classical conditioning and operant conditioning. So look at this social learning perspective and try to see how that maps out to things in terms of these things going on. The other thing I would ask you to add is they spend some time on page 262 talking about mirror neurons in the brain, so add that to your outline as well. Hopefully this has been good, and send me drafts if you want. I'll be happy to edit them. I think keeping the agenda in here, maybe separating out the agenda for one assignment as I'll do, and the agenda for the second, and then adding in your detailed outline notes to this, not just notes, but detailed information from what I've shared with you verbally and the book information, and reading the abstracts will be good. Good luck and thanks. Bye-bye.